Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most Homerian work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we're coming at you live, pew pew pew, in the Discord, 24/7.
But whether you're listening live or not, just a bit of a public service announcement that the Pale audiobook is looking for people to, just fucking do whatever. We need whatever. Readers, if you just want to edit audio, So hit me up or hit up Number Wangman or whoever and we'll get you in. But we desperately need more people. The project is trying to get back up and running. If you feel at all like helping out with the Pale audiobook, reach out. Let us know.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, let's get into it. Speaking of Pale audiobooks, let's start some audio about this Pale book, huh?
Nailed it.
Let's Slip 20.a. Our first interlude of this arc, presumably. We're presumably going to get an interlude from every single St. Victor's kid. So, yeah.
All 10 of them.
Well, they're adding 5 more now, right? So, yeah, this is going to be a long arc.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I looked up more. Like last week, you brought up the like "Let's Slip the Dogs of War" quote that this arc title might be referencing to, and like obviously, we see a lot of the Dogs of War this week, which feels relevant to that. But also, I couldn't help but view what happens to the Negateers in this chapter with Nomi as like they're also some metaphorical dogs being let slip from their leashes.
Yeah. Nomi, what an interesting character. So Nomi, whose teacher is Yiyun, they talk about dichotomies and grey areas, and it's a great start to a conversation.
Yeah. Nomi's getting off easy compared to us. Wildbow's only making her deal with dichotomies. The rest of this story is fucking trichotomies and all sorts of crazy shit and layered symbolism I can't keep up with. And fucking Nomi only has to deal with dichotomies. Like, she's got it easy.
I'm assuming we knew that Nomi and Yiyun were the necromancers before this chapter, but like,
yeah,
obviously there are too many of these St. Victor's kids to keep that perfectly straight. So starting with this,
I literally have a doc. If there's that miscellaneous Pale Reflections list doc we have, just the two of us. I've literally been keeping a Negateer tracker at the bottom because I was having the same problem.
Yeah, and I know Snowdrop's Tiny Fan has a doc for this exact thing.
Of course she does.
but yeah, so like I started this chapter and I'm like, I don't remember which, what the specialty of these two is, and I didn't want to. Like, I'd like, all right, I'll just wait until it's kind of shown to me.
I'll find out
eventually. And so this conversation about dichotomies was such a fun lead-in because they do mention life and death, but then like just the reveal of literally a necromancer being the one that exists between life and death. It's just such a cool like lead-in to these necromantic discussions. I think it's great.
Yeah, and like this is such a this is something that Wildbow always does such a cool job of. It's like this is such a sensible kind of life philosophy for like the practice that deals with breaking what I would say is probably the most important rule of life, which is that it ends and there's death. This is what's always so impressive about all these practices is Wildbow's really able to like narrow in on an angle that just makes sense. Like, of course, necromancy is fucking with one of the biggest constants in life. And so their whole thing is getting dichotomies and fucking them up and looking for the third option, the third angle. Like, it just makes sense.
Yeah. It's very good. I like it.
It's also just like a good life philosophy. Like, I was just immediately on board with Yiyun in this section. Like, obviously the topic of like challenging the gender dichotomy comes up briefly, and Nomi's a bit of an idiot, so she puts her foot in her mouth there. But like, I think we've talked on the podcast before about how I definitely consider exploring gender something everyone should do, and like I came out of mine still essentially cis, but it was still a good thing to just, I guess, reaffirm things about myself and better understand also the people around me. And like, I guess this is just like it's just so natural to extend that to kind of everything. Like, it just seems like a good life philosophy to be running around and, like, wherever you see people drawing dichotomies, to sort of try to challenge it as a way to make sure that it actually holds merit.
Mm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think finding the balance between extremes is a great lesson for Yiyun to push here to Nomi. And kind of contextualized by the fact that, this chapter ends. I guess we're going to jump around, but I think it's important to. This chapter ends with Maricica saying to Nomi, "Oh, you're the one who can chase down extremes." Like,
Yeah.
it's almost perfectly prescient from Yiyun to start teaching this lesson at the start of this chapter. Like, it's brilliant.
Yeah, Maricica's like, yeah, challenge these dichotomies, sure, but I know when push comes to shove, you're gonna hit one of them in the extreme, and
Mm.
you just got to hope that she's wrong.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and her response to that is, well, I don't want to. I kind of don't want to take the extreme path. I'm going to do something in the middle and do both. Right? She
yeah,
practices the.
she
Yeah,
finds the extreme third.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, but I guess something else that like for me this whole dichotomy thing comes into is like it just feels like this is so pale. Like one of the other like as this dichotomy talk was going on, I was just thinking of so many examples in the story of where somebody has been doing this and it's been a good thing. Like Toadswallow has been doing this with fairy and goblin and that dichotomy. He's been tearing that apart. Obviously, there was like the Megafire essay about others versus practitioners, where Mega all but predicted like Muss's whole shtick. Like there's been so many things where both in and out of the story, somebody kind of looking at a dichotomy and saying, "Nah, fuck that," is a good thing, and it's kind of Kennett's whole deal, really. Um,
Mm,
like this whole story, this whole series, like the Otherverse is all about kind of looking at labels and categories and trying to challenge them and make sure that like well yeah just I guess challenge them whether you end up agreeing with them or not. It's like the thing that this came back to for me is like, oh hey, it makes sense that this core thing for necromancy makes sense for pale because like death is the pale, right? Like necromancy
oh,
is the practice that deals the most directly with
good
the force that is the
point.
title of this story.
What a
Like
good point.
um, it kind of makes sense that Yiyun as the necromancer is one of the people we're meeting who's just like, oh, yeah, she embodies what this story is talking about because
Mm,
she literally fucks with the pale for her job.
mm. Yeah, I like that. That's great.
I mean,
That's a very good call.
I want Yiyun to stab Charles in the back. And I know we talked about this in 19.z because she's the one who in the awakening ritual for the Negateers, she was the one who's like, but Charles, they're just children, which is, what Charles said to Miss. So I was hoping that she was gonna, be the Charles to Charles and stab him in the back. Um
Mm.
and I feel pretty confident that we can assume she's gonna do that now. Like she's just such a Kennett person. She needs to be in Kennett. She doesn't belong with Charles at all. Uh, and so it's
Yeah.
like she's gonna betray him at this point. It's really just a question of is she gonna have to sacrifice herself like she did with her daughter? Like, is that a pattern that's gonna repeat itself, or could we get her out of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is a chapter about Nomi, but I do feel like a lot of it is, oh, Yiyun is very interesting, and I want more of. um, but Nomi is an interesting character too. Obviously, we learn more about Nomi over the course of this chapter because it's her interlude. Uh, yeah, she's interesting. I very much see her as a character in a similar camp to like Raquel of like in a position where I can totally see them doing some fucked up shit, but I can also maybe see them being turned around. So we'll have to kind of see what happens there. She is not coming to the cool fireworks party, so off to a bad start.
She might have been one of the two who was asleep. Um,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, but she gets extra hours in the day, right? That the whatever the twilight
yeah,
hours.
could
And if
we
that were
talk about that?
me, I would just use that to sleep extra. So you wouldn't think she would need to sleep that much time.
No, I think she does her jobs then, but we're going to talk about that. Why would you not do this long
I know
twilight
it's
ritual?
such a good ritual.
It seems like an
It's like the
unambiguous
clearly the
win.
best ritual in the most useful ritual we've seen in Pale. Obviously the downside to it was like there's some kind of pushback, universal pushback, right?
Well, it sounds like the two problems, as far as I could tell, were
Mm,
one, you have to make sure around Twilight that you're not around any innocence,
yeah,
which I mean that's fine. I avoid people as a general rule,
yeah,
and
easy
then
peasy.
the other one is like, oh, it costs a lot to stop it, especially as you let
Yeah.
it go on longer. Which is one of those things where I was like, man, I know this is a trap, but why would I want to stop it? Like, I'll happily do
Yeah,
this for the rest of my
yeah,
life. Like, yeah,
yeah. No, I'm with you. It's a pretty good one, isn't it?
yeah, like, yeah. Um, But anyway, yeah, sorry, getting back to Nomi and what you were saying about her, I love the comparison to Raquel back when Raquel was in town in like arcs 12 and
Mm,
13.
mm,
That that holds a lot of weight. And yeah, like I know I wasn't the only person who noticed how Nomi she just reads like a teenager, like
yeah,
more than the Kettateers. I was like, oh, this is like a stupid 15-year-old who
yeah. She's a bit of a goober, isn't she?
like she was just she kept trying to pretend she wasn't it. Oh, it was like that classic teenage thing where she's like, "Oh, I'm too cool to,
Yeah.
be engaged," but then she wasn't. So, like, yeah, like I don't know, she was annoying, but it was also part of me kept being like, "Well, you would be too if like the closest thing you had to guidance outside of Yiyun was like Charles and Marcy and Liz."
Mm,
Um, Also, sorry, the other big teenage energy was the insecurity. Um, like just the I think my favorite one is when she looks at the corpse and thinks, God, that corpse has even fuller hair than I do. It's
mm,
just like, know me, please.
yeah. She's pretty down on herself, isn't she? That's maybe the car ride that's getting her into a bad headspace.
Yeah. Uh it's not a fun time story, her backstory.
Mm. Yeah, she explains her backstory to Yiyun, and yeah, it's harsh, it's cooked, it's terrible.
It's one of those situations where I'm like, man, there were no winners here. Like their
Mm,
mum was clearly, some form of abusive, even at the later stages. I think, despite what Nomi was saying, it's clear she wasn't like quote unquote better.
mm,
But also like her brother didn't really help. Uh, despite what he seemed to think, like it just nobody came out of this better for it. It was a situation which is everyone involved was worse off, unless you take Charles's view and realize that this is the adversity she needs to push past to get stronger.
mm, yeah. But this is not the most fucked up backstory in this chapter. We'll get to that later.
True, true. So my next point is interesting because it was raised in my live read by Megafire, and now like Tommy B and Shiny Fan are both bringing it up too, which is I kind of took Nomi at her word that her mum was actually getting better, and I saw it as this really endearing trait that she was able to hold on to the good in someone who had been abusive to her in the past. And it was still very much this situation of get her the fuck out of there. But I like that she seemed like a good enough person to still have faith in their goodness as people. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, I guess as Tommy, STF, and Megafire brought up, they've read it all much more as like just a a coping mechanism. Like she was a child in an abusive relationship, and so she was like sort of kidding herself. I guess I don't know what the terms are to use here. I'm so bad
mm,
at this sort of stuff, but like yeah, just
mm.
essentially that it was just an abusive
Self-deluding
relationship.
or you
Yeah,
deluding. Yeah.
I think Megafire quoted this thing called like the honeymoon phase, which is where like an abuser will sort of be like, "Oh, I'm gonna get better now, and it's all gonna be okay," and
Yeah.
then things kind of are okay for a bit, and then it just goes back to the bad pattern.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
very easy to fall back into those very terrible habits, I guess.
yeah, but it's just interesting what a different read on Nomi as a character that sort of one detail leads to. Because on my first read through, came out with this image of Nomi as somebody who, like, at her core, wanted to be or wanted people to be good and wanted to help people, and like, oh, she will get swung around by the Kettateers. But on the reread, I think Mega and everyone else's read is probably truer, just based on a few other details. And it was like that kind of swings around to making me a lot more worried about how much she's just going to like kind of continue to glomp onto Team Charles as the people who are uh, lifting her up in a way, in a pattern that is closer to what she's comfortable with.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I guess we haven't talked about it that much, but the the Negateers have had like one or two interactions with the Kenneteers, right? Not many,
Yeah,
but they haven't. But they clearly have such a rough vibe of what the Kenneteers are. Like, you know, at the end of this chapter, they talk about, oh, we should go after them and fucking like get them. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And it's so. It just screams to me, oh, there's so much propaganda being fed to these kids about what the Kenneteers are that is so clearly untrue. And I mean, you know, I guess if there's one read on it where we've been
yeah,
spending 2 years reading propaganda for the Kenneteers, I guess. But like, you know, it just is so clear to me that they are being manipulated, and
yeah,
Nomi is, I guess, one of the people that is just, you know, falling. I don't know if falling for it is the right word, but like, you know,
yeah.
in that
Drinking the
mindset.
Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Whereas Yiyun feels, again, to go back to how cool Yiyun is, feels slightly above it in that sense.
Yeah, and definitely feels like she's soft pushing against it, but we can talk about that more
Yeah.
later. But yeah, it's
I,
I
I,
mean,
I wa-
what sorry, you go.
Sorry, I just want to say, I want to call out what I'm easily impressed put in chat, which I think is great. Like, the kids just don't understand the reality of their situation. They think it's a game deep down, and evidence of that is that there's zero reflection on them having murdered 6 people in this chapter, right? Like,
Yeah. Um
yeah, I don't know. It's rough.
well that I mean that also ties into to what I want to say, which is
Mm,
both that aspect and what you're talking about them like not trusting the Kenneteers and drinking their Kool-Aid is exactly what we brought up when the Negateers were first introduced as an idea in Liz's interlude. Was saying one of the fun things about the Negateers is going to be they're these wild practitioners who are being raised up by a bunch of bad others, and it's exactly what everyone at the BHI kept telling the Kenneteers they were. And it's such a fun inversion at the end of the story to have these kids who are actually the bad version of things and being told that the Kenneteers way is the bad way to do it,
mhm,
and like like it's this really interesting challenge on what the Kenneteers are, because it's essentially they're going to have to argue against all of the arguments that we used on them at the start of the story. Like that's so
mm,
fun. It's like no,
mm.
you don't understand. Your others are actually the bad ones, and you shouldn't trust them. Like that's so. It's going to be so hilarious to hear Lucy say something like that after, like, reading arc 4 or 5.
But the thing that makes it feel like they can do that to me is the Negateers are creeped out actively
Oh
by a
yeah,
lot of the people that they're interacting with. Like, it's pretty clear from the interactions, like, Nomi gets, oh, the ordinary family are bad, right? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's so hopefully if they meet like fucking Miss or whatever, and Miss is just like, yeah, I'm cool, chill, I'm not mean. Like, I don't know. I feel like hopefully that will start to be like, oh yeah, we're the baddies. That
yeah.
contextualizes everything.
I agree with you, but I also want you to take your mind back to how much we distrusted Miss for the first few arcs.
Sure,
Now,
sure.
the
That's
first time
fair.
we met John, he did hold a gun to their head. And
Um,
also there was the Hungry Choir, which,
well, they don't exist
Kenneteers,
anymore, and that was
yeah.
Charles's doing.
I mean, yeah, but this is the same. The other
Yeah,
creepy
yeah,
one
yeah,
was Marcy, who's just moved camps.
yeah.
But yeah, like I mean, this is the thing, right? It was like there was like the Hungry Choir, and the Kenneteers
Yes.
looked at that and said, "No, we
Yeah,
don't
no,
want that
you're
here."
right. You're right. It wasn't perfect, but
Yeah.
also, you know, there were the conspirators in
Oh,
their midst. So
but yeah, no, and then also the Hungry Choir, the Kenneteers were like, "We don't want that here," and so they got rid of it. Like they helped improve it. So the way they got the creepy thing, and they said, "No, that's not a part of our community. Like we are not allowing that to stay here." And the problem is the Negateers are just surrounded by Hungry Choirs. Like that
yeah,
is the community.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, no,
Um,
sorry, it is just interesting. Yeah, I guess to take it back a bit, like Nomi is this person who I still have this read that there's somebody salvageable in here, but it was funny how this small difference that I guess just because of my background I was totally able to miss, like with regards to how how she viewed her mom changes her from someone who I'm like, oh, she's right. Like she's basically a Negateer. We'll swap her to like, oh, this is somebody who's going to be quite hard to pry away from Maricica and Charles.
Mm, yeah, yeah. We'll have to see, I suppose. So yeah, Nomi kind of has a panic attack from this conversation and gets the car to stop and kind of rushes off and calms herself down out in the cold, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I used to do as a kid when I'd get car sick, just 100 times more intense.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, this really feels like it happened so quickly. Like, there's no. I guess Nomi's talking about it, but then it just kind of spirals, and then suddenly she's in the middle of a panic attack. Like, there's no inciting. You can kind of tell that this is a solidly traumatic
Yeah,
and traumatized person because she's not responding to any tangible stimuli really here. It's just, oh shit, suddenly I'm reflecting on all the parts of myself that I hate, and now I need to stop because I'm panicking and I can't break that spiral.
yeah.
It's rough to read.
It's that mixture of like she's going over her past,
Mm,
which like sends her on this thought spiral that gets worse and worse because of the car to the point where it just crosses the line and it becomes like full blown panic attack.
mm,
Um, and I yeah, again, props to Yiyun who just handles this about as well as you could. I think. I still think we'll talk about Yiyun probably more later, but like, I do think it's really interesting to me because something that jumped out to me with this part is on the second read, Yiyun handles this really well. Like the big good mom vibes with how she helps Nomi through this, which I thought was interesting because she wouldn't have actually had to do so much of this with her own daughter, right? Like her her own daughter was so virginal in every sense that like presumably she just didn't really have problems. Like she didn't cry, she didn't sweat. Like aside from the whole your family's trying to hunt you to kill you, it must have been a pretty easy parenting gig, I would have thought. Um,
mm,
and that just made me realize because this is the other thing we see a number of times. Nomi is caught off guard by how Yiyun is just kind of a good mom to her, and like the dynamic between these two is so interesting because they're kind of trying to slot each other into these mother daughter positions for each other, but they're so different to who their real mothers and daughters are. Like it's such a weird inversion for the two of them.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. I I really like it, I guess, is what I would say. Like, the relationship between these two is clearly
Yeah,
something that I think is beneficial to both of them.
it kind of feels like Charles accidentally lucked into a good dynamic for
Well,
these two.
I don't think it's good for Charles though, right?
No,
Like,
that's what I'm saying. Like he accidentally created a good relationship which might come to bite him
yes.
in the ass. Yeah.
I think it will, because I think the relationships that will serve Charles the best are the ones that are a bit more like maybe Cameron and Seth, right? Where Cameron is kind of
Unhealthy relationships is what
yeah,
you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, 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 exactly. Or like the Abyssal folks as well,
Yeah.
where clearly like there's a push that is very strong there that is not nurturing, and maybe it just comes down to the fact that Seth and Leonard are just not people that should be in charge of minors.
Well,
Whereas
yeah.
Yiyun is like a mother that kind of clearly would put her
Yeah.
child above her own needs to an extent.
Like the problem is Yiyun is essentially the only forsworn person who seems to have come out of the experience still a genuinely very good person. Um,
Yeah.
and that is what is going to hurt Charles.
Yes.
Because he is
Yes.
essentially like what is so funny about this is he's made Moss's organization is what he's done. Everyone needs to be
Hmm.
competing, like it's all unhealthy relationships. Like it's just consistently wild to me how much he's recreating the systems that he hates with one small tweak that he hangs his hat on.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah.
So Nomi does have an undead mouse here that I really like. So
Yes, very
props
cute.
to
An
the
emotional
cute.
support undead.
Very like snowdrop sort of vibes. I mean, there's a million lines to draw between Nomi and the Kenneteers, but this very much was just like this is her little snowdrop. Um, which, yeah, I mean, there's this line where she sort of explains how she like programmed this mouse, and it's basically just it's meant to think of her as a mother, and is just like so. This is how she describes how a daughter thinks of a mother. They're loyal, following instructions, drawn to them, and like crawling all over her in the vague pursuit of the nourishment it didn't need. Which was
Mm,
just very much the moment on my reread where I was like, "Oh, I think Mega's right." I think
mm.
I think that actually she did not have a healthy relationship with her mum.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, they arrive to their destination, and it's the ordinary family, and Yiyun kind of makes a bit of a bargain for the kids, which is great. Um, the
Seemingly.
ordinary.
This is one of those things
Mm,
where I can't help but be on Seth's side for this, which is like it's like that's when shit's real because it's like Yiyun's like, no, I've made it so they've got the fireproof suits and it will be safe, and I was like, I just don't know that any amount of
yeah,
guarantee would make me feel safe there.
yeah, no, for sure. Having said that, though, I do think this is good, just because like it's clear to me from this that Yeon is trying to keep the kids safe outside of
Yeah,
Charles and Marcy, which is great because it's a very good instinct from her.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, Yeon is offering them 3 bodies in exchange for them doing her a favor, but they keep saying things like, "Oh, we'll take care of this problem for you. Like, we'll handle this for you." And also do something for you. And so it's very clear, like, they're trying to phrase it in an ordinary way of, oh, we'll help you out by solving this problem for you. But no, they want those bodies, and it's very creepy. And I don't understand. Like, is this them reproducing through the bodies, or like, I don't fucking know. It's fucking creepy.
Yeah, I mean, I love how committed they are to their bit of just being normal people. Like, that's what makes it so creepy, is like
Yeah.
and it ends up being kind of played for comedy because like Yiyun just doesn't have any of it. Like they're like,
Mm.
"Oh, we wouldn't know necromancy. What is this word? We're just ordinary people." And she's like, "Don't fucking make me at Charles. Like I will bring him down here and talk about things."
It's
And
so stupid.
like it's just
Uh,
it, it's so creepy and funny. It's just off-putting is just the word that kept coming. Like I just every time they're on screen, I hate these people and I want more of them. I also love we still don't know what they are. Like it's been very few
no.
times in this story where we've not known what something is on any level. I guess especially like coming from Pact.
Mm.
Um like Faceful is the last time I remember having an other in this story for an extended period where I was like, what is this motherfucker? I don't know what
Mm.
he is.
Yeah,
Um
Yiyun also does not know. So clearly,
yeah.
that people just don't know what they are.
Well that
I
was
feel
that
like
was
they're
what
body snatchers. I feel like it's they take these corpses and they turn them into clones of people, and
yeah.
then those people. That's
Even
my
the
thing.
Legendaries didn't know though. Remember the Legendaries just like we can't figure out what these guys are, so we just drew a big circle around them and made them stay, and then Charles let them out. Um, I assume Charles and Marcy are probably the only two who really know what they are, and
Mm,
the other judges. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, it feels like Nomi brings up the whole like virginal thing, and I think there is. I feel like there's some manipulation of the idea of innocence. Like they're like pretending to be innocent so hard that it works. So I don't know. Like they're just so creepy. I love them so much.
Mm, yeah. No, they're good. They're good stuff.
Um, Also, so the other thing that Yiyun brings up here that I wanted to quickly tinfoil about was as a part of all their deals, she's been getting all the lords to push all their excess death energy into a black chair.
Yeah.
The fuck do you think this black chair is for? Like this
Uh,
feels like Chekhov's chair, right? Where it's just like now we know
well,
Yiyun's packing a chair that all the lords have been pouring death energy into for months. The
well, I think
fuck is this for?
what I'm easily impressed said in chat is hit Charles over the head with it, which I do like. But no, I feel like something imagery that I would associate with necromancers a fair amount is like a throne to conduct their minions from. You know what I mean? So maybe this is a kind of a
Huh.
part of becoming a necromancer is setting up a, a power base, almost like a domain or an implement or something, but kind of I guess a slightly lower level. So that's what I would imagine.
I guess because I heard chair, I was picturing like a little wooden dining room chair.
Well, I mean, it
S-
could be. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
I just think that's a
yeah,
funny necromancer throne. Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I don't know. It'll
The
be
other,
interesting to see. I want to see more of the death chair.
The other theory in chat is that it's like for executing people. You say, "Oh, here, come to my dinner party. Oh, please take this seat. You fool! Now you die." Anyway, so yeah, Yiyun trades her backstory to Nomi in exchange for Nomi's backstory earlier, and totally one-ups her, and it's great.
I do love that Nomi's like, oh, my trauma is so weak in comparison to
Yeah,
this. Like,
loser. But yeah, no, this is horrifying.
yes,
Such a messed up story. This is like the worst example of practitioner family fuckery that we've got, I think, in Pale.
yeah. This is one of those things where later on, Yiyun's like, yeah, Charles, broke my family and tore their house down, blah blah. And part of me was like,
yeah,
good on you, Charles. Like, you don't get to say it that often, but this is one of those ticks in the Charles column of like, can't argue with that.
Yeah. So yeah, Yiyun is a champion, and I love it.
Yeah, it's fucking insane that she's come out of this and is still seemingly as good a person as she comes across
Yeah.
as. Like, it kind of you kind of get the vibe that a lot of the other Forsworn weren't particularly good people before they were Forsworn. Like, Seth was
No.
already a dick. Leonard seems like he was the worst before anyway. But like, Charles wasn't that bad a person before he got Forsworn. He was arguably bordering on being a good one.
Mm,
And obviously, like, being forsworn turned him into the piece of shit we're now
the
having to deal
bitter
with.
mess, yeah.
Whereas Yiyun, like, 4 years in this cage, having to like hear your daughter for that amount of time. The fact that she's come out of this not just a blabbering evil mess is incredible.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess Yiyun has had a lot of time to reflect, and so maybe that has been helpful.
Well, yeah, so did Charles. Like, he didn't. He just
Yeah,
didn't take it.
yeah, true.
Like, yeah. Just again, Yiyun, betray Charles sooner rather than later, please.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and I mean, actually, it is worth like talking about, because there is this moment where, like, yeah, Nomi does bring up that like she would be pretty diehard loyal to someone like Charles for rescuing her and tearing her family down, and that's where Yiyun says, "Look, you're right, but that's not really the takeaway of this story," and tries to pivot again before Seth shows up. But that's like that moment where Yiyun is like, yes, I'm very thankful for Charles, but she's distinctly pushing back on this idea that it's a diehard loyalty.
Mm.
And like the thing I kept thinking as I was reading this chapter the first time was just, when are we going to get to the nudging towards evaluating the our side versus your side dichotomy? Like, that's the dichotomy Yiyun needs to push Nomi towards.
Well, yeah, and then maybe the answer is don't pick either side, and even
Yeah.
that's a win, I think.
Well, yeah, that's usually Kennett's philosophy. Kennett keeps getting presented with
True.
sides, and they're like, "No, we're
Yeah,
just going to do what is
you're
right."
They're very good at that, aren't they?
Like, that's the thing. Like, I don't think Kennett necessarily would want any of the or be like, "You've got to take our side to the Negateers." Really, I feel like Kennett's philosophy would be, "Hey, just do the right thing," and like that's probably going to be on our side because we're not, dickheads like Charles. But like, it's not about taking our side; it's about not being shit cunts.
Mm. Yeah. 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 I have faith. I have faith in you. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I gotta call out this line where
Oh,
Yiyun says,
I can't handle it.
Yiyun says to Nomi, "I've taken you into my charge. I'm not very good at letting you know, apparently, but I will go to any ends to protect you now." To which Nomi responds, "Hopefully not cutting me open."
I mean, what is wrong with you, Nomi? Like, fuck me.
It's
Such
just so funny.
psycho.
It's like, that's such good cringe. Like, it's just, you can tell she was trying to be lighthearted and funny, and it's just, that's got to be the worst foot in mouth situation in this entire story.
Mm.
And then, yeah, Nomi immediately follows that up with, in her head, what a fucking stupid thing to say.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very good. So Seth arrives, and the group starts to prep for some invading practitioners that they have to deal with.
Yeah, and so yeah, we meet Seth, and he calls Yiyun Jen, which is
Mm.
presumably her like anglicized name. Which I remember. I'm pretty sure. Oh, was it Zed? Was it Seth or Chase who called Zed Z as a
I think it
compromise?
was Chase.
It might
Yeah.
have been Chase, but yeah, I don't know. Just it was like, here we go again with it was like the fact that Seth, the first thing he does is call Yu and Jen felt like it sounds like okay, so he hasn't come out of this fully healed or whatever, like he's still Seth.
Mm. Yeah. Seth comes off interestingly in this narration, doesn't he?
This was worse to read than what Nomi said before. Is Nomi being thirsty for Seth was
Yeah.
the most uncomfortable part of this
In
POV
what
for
world
sure.
is Seth a cool, chill dude? But that's clearly like the vibe that we get from him in this, and it's so weird. It's like, oh, their standards. The
Yeah.
Negateers are used to such terrible teachers and adults in their lives that, yeah, Seth is a step up.
Yeah, and I mean, you could tie this into like, the whole thing that Megafire brought up about like she has this unhealthy relationship with authority. Um, but I think I'm trying to remember back to 2.Z because that was the Nicolette interlude where we met most of these guys. I remember she was kind of saying like Chase was getting a bit fat, so he wasn't quite as attractive as he used to be or whatever. I feel like
Mm.
Seth was the one who she was like he was kind of attractive. So it's just this thing where you got this sleazy guy who sort of suggested to Snowdrop that if she was like 2 years older, which is like an 18 and a 13-year-old, that he'd be down. Um, and he's quite an attractive guy, and you're making him work alone with a 16-year-old female student. Like, Charles, what are you doing? Um, yeah, yeah. Because, yeah, it seems like Cameron is, yeah, quite close to him. Yeah, God. Just it's crazy. It's crazy that the rest of Charles's organization is so bad that Seth is the sexy one.
Yeah. And I guess to add to that, the sheer fuckery of Leonard as a mentor and
Yeah.
how telegraphed the horrors of the end of this chapter are, is fun. It's clearly very fucked.
It's like because again, like the abyss is still something we don't know that much about at this point. Like,
No.
yeah, we've gotten more and more bits and pieces throughout the story, but it's still very much in my head. It exists as this place that is just we used to think it was hell. That's like the main fact I remember about
Hmm.
it. And
Yeah.
so hearing he's like got this big scream that he's going to do, and everyone's like, "We don't want to be around for that." Is just like you're like, "Okay, I don't know what this is going to involve, but I'm fucking scared."
Yep. And that's justified based on the end of this chapter.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, these in air quotes invading practitioners are with Kenneth, and so they're like, "Oh, that's fine. You're with Kenneth. We're with Kenneth." Oh no, not the right Kenneth, unfortunately. So they get summarily fucked,
wrecked.
which is
Yeah.
rough. Yeah,
Um, I do love how they bring up the promenade though. Like this is that
yeah.
little that we're obviously going to catch up with Avery briefly next chapter, but um, I love this vibe of like one of the big things in this story is that Finder shit is so under the radar. Like I remember again to quote chapter 2.Z when they first found out Avery was on a path, Alexander had to call up people to even find out what that meant. Like
Mm.
in general, like the paths are something that people don't really know about, and yet seemingly everyone outside of Finders is like, "Wow, this promenade shit sounds big," um, and it just it makes me think like it feels important, like as we're about to gear up to seemingly combat Charles. It feels important that like Avery has seemingly, at least for the short term, become a household name potentially around the world. Um,
Mm.
like because the thing I come back to is we often talk about how I view the paths as like being on like the cutting edge of new ideas and like the sort of inventory cutting edge science side of the other verse, and so it feels like Avery's just sort of made the headlines for being like the 14-year-old girl who made like some big breakthrough, like she discovered evidence of the Higgs boson or something. Like she's just she's done the equivalent of like make some huge scientific discovery,
Mm.
To the point where even people who don't usually really know what quantum physics is are like, "Oh, she discovered the God particle or whatever," like, and it's made the regular news, and that just feels like it's going to have to matter as it comes up against Charles.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like it feels big. It's so big that it's impossible for it not to factor into uh,
Yeah,
to things. I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's so big that it's even making headlines in places that whereas up until now everyone else has been like, "What is path?"
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, we'd never find out really who these practitioners are, but I guess it doesn't matter because they're just ordinary folk
Yeah,
now.
yeah, they're pretty ordinary,
Yeah.
very unexceptional. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
The
I mean,
oh.
I think that's like almost the point. Is it was
Mm,
very much like, maybe we'll get their names at some point in a throwaway line about they went missing or so, but it's just they're just good citizens. They were working with Kenneth, and Charles is why we can't have nice things.
mm, yeah. Yeah. Charles. What a guy. Um, but yeah, so they win this fight pretty effectively, but that's not good enough for Leonard, who pushes his charge to sing some abyss on these fools, which he does, and it is pretty rough for everybody involved.
Yeah, this is just you got to look at this practice and think just why from the bottom to
Mm,
the top, why?
yeah, it's rough. So yeah, Nomi sees her mum, not just her mum, but her mum, proportionally at the size that she was when Nomi was 10 or 11. Um, and it's fucked. It's a perfect bomb to drop that's been built
Yeah,
over the course of this chapter. It's a very well contained little reveal, which is great and horrifying.
yeah. Yeah, it's like so this scream seemingly just brings out the perfect shit to torture everyone with mentally is the vibe I get. Like I googled it and bedlamite means like madman or lunatic. So this like
Mm,
bedlam scream is just like a scream of lunacy, I think is how it's called later. So it's just like
yeah.
makes you go insane and I guess confronts you with the worst shit. Like presumably we hear that Yiyun is just kind of quietly sitting in her circle coping, and part of me was like, well, yeah, presumably it was just her daughter cursing her out, which is like she had to deal with that shit for 4 years. Like, if anyone can cope with it, she can.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
Uh, so yeah, I guess as we are about to get into the chat with Marcy and all the stuff about why Nomi was chosen and what their plans for her are, um, I wanted to call out this sort of moment where her mum tells her that she's going to hell, and Nomi just sort of says, "I know." I knew that was a risk when I made the deal to awaken, but I'm tired of being lesser. And I love this as a line that then leads into what Marcy's going to talk about, because the line about her not wanting to be lesser is sitting in your head as Marcy gives her the speech about
Mm,
how they want her to fuck shit up. Um, and so you can just connect those dots so perfectly.
yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, she's a good pick to join the team for sure in a lot of ways. But yeah, so Nomi wakes up in the abyss with her goddess watching over her, and as we all do sometimes, gets a quick pep talk from God.
I mean, honestly, like, yeah, it would be easier to be in a religion that doesn't involve faith because your God just, gives you some
He's
head
right
pats
there.
and
Yeah.
gives you a chat. I mean, it is funny seeing this. Like, I was going to call Nomi a Catholic, but I suppose ex-Catholic would perhaps be more appropriate given she's chatting to her new god. Um, actually, sorry, it is funny how her mum was like, "You're gonna go to hell," and then the next scene she wakes up here, and I was like, "Yeah, Dobie, maybe you're already there."
Mm,
But yeah, it's interesting how like this really continues to reinforce the idea that we just brought, which is like Nomi knows this is sacrilegious. Like she's still thinking in terms of Catholicism of like she thinks she's going to go to hell. She thinks it's bad that she's worshiping this here pagan goddess, but she just doesn't care. Like she's like, I don't care if this means I go to hell forever. Like I'm just so sick of being lesser and the system not helping me. And it's this, yeah, real moment of like, yeah, you can see why you got to be worried about her.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. It's worrying. I mean, yeah, it's I don't know.
Yeah.
It just yeah, I just I'm very I just want everyone to be friends, I guess.
Yeah. Um, well, so I guess like kind of speaking of like, it's probably overdue that we really sort of talk about how Nomi compares to the Kenneteers because
Mm,
there's like a bunch of threads you can draw between her and all three of them. Like, there's some family stuff that touches on both Verona and Lucy's like pasts. Like, there's stuff for all of them. And which is in part a testament to this rich garden of motifs Wildbow has grown for himself. That it's incredibly easy for him to build a new Negateer who can just touch on bits of all three of them. Um,
mm,
but like I guess this is why it's really occurring to me. Like in our reflecting episode with Lexi, I talked a lot about how I'm thinking now of like a big part of the Kenneteers arcs in this later part of the story is this idea that they're having to heal or be the people that they needed in the past. And so
mm,
what's really fun about the Negateers is like each Negateer doesn't map to a Kenneteer. Like there's not the one that Verona will help and the one that Lucy will help, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Like Nomi's issues don't just map to one Kenneteer. She's kind of got bits that she'll need from all three of them. So it's not just being the Verona needed at the start of the story. It's like working as a team to be the community that Nomi needs to solve her problems, as opposed to what Charles is offering, which is exacerbating them.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so it's just this is why the Negateers are such fun villains for this part of the story, where like the Kenneteers are being challenged to like figure out how to be the people they needed at the start of the story to people who have just much worse versions of what they got at the start of the story.
Mm,
Um, like Charles and Marcy and like what the Negateers have is what people like Jazz thought Miss was. Like people were so worried, Jazz was so worried that Miss was like manipulating them and turning them into little terrorists, and that's what Charles is doing. And it's so fun now. They not only have to get past that, they need to figure out the way to be those people, be the people that Nomi and Co need.
mm, yeah. 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 I mean, hopefully.
And I guess to go even more broad, like we saw that like Miss made the Kenneteers, like just to speak about the Kenneteers versus the Negateers conceptually. Miss made the Kenneteers and like empowered them to discover themselves and get into practices they like through experimentation. Like Lucy and Verona are sort of only just now figuring out what they want to be. Avery
Mm,
was just a bit easier because her thing was just Miss's thing. Um,
yeah.
but like we see how Charles and Co have done the opposite. They've kind of forced these kids into roles based on a stupid
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
They're technically meant to share info, but it's pretty clear that that is like a
Not
hugely
happening.
secondary thing
Yeah.
that's not really happening. And it's all competitive and uneasy, and it really feels like Charles is just it's just practitioner culture. It's Moss's group, but without the dynasties. And then there's this ability to drop out, which I'm becoming less and
Yeah.
less convinced is a good thing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, this was our criticism of Charles the whole time he was gearing up for his plan, was like, all your plan is going to do is change who's in which position on
Yeah,
this same totem pole.
yeah, he's changing like what he sees as like the one thing that's wrong with the system. Like yeah, it's just like, oh, if we fix this one thing, then the rest of it's kind of okay. And it's like no,
Mm,
it's clearly not. Um,
mm,
like to talk about the whole like out system, like Nomi kind of directly addresses in this chapter that like it's she's probably not going to take it even when she should. And like I guess you wouldn't, right? Like this is the whole thing we saw with Melissa, right? Was it's like they're like, hey, you shouldn't think magic is real or whatever, and she's like, what am I going back to? Like I'm never going to make that choice. Um,
mm,
and Bristow is probably the other comparison. Verona gave Bristow an out, and he stubbornly chose to go through the shit because of the momentum he had. Like it's just what the out really seems to be for me is like the other thing is the out isn't just something that the Negateers can trigger; it's something that their teachers can trigger. So it's creating this stupid system where now it's like they're essentially being threatened. Like they have to behave and they have to do what they're told, or they could just lose it all. Like it's gone from being something that should prevent forswearance and actually become just like a tool of control. Like it's so shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just perpetuating the same things, right? I don't know. It's just disappointing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, oh, Charles is such a chiller. And then sometimes you're like, oh, Charles, you're just achieving nothing.
He's so close and yet so far, just
Yeah.
all the time. I guess the other comparison that I kept wanting to make in my live read was to like the Blue Heron Institute, and in fact, I kind of decided now it almost like if we go back to the triplet model that we've talked about of like can it found, can it below, can it above as the kind of representatives of the three sides here. The Kenneteers are kind of the can it found Blue Heron equivalent in a way. Like they are Mrs. Solution to practice. The Blue Heron Institute was like Alexander and Musser and Co.'s very like Kennett above fix, which was an elitist school that kind of made things better, but very much reinforced the status quo. And then obviously Charles has got his, negateers here that are shit. We've just gone over that. Um, and so I guess it's just really funny to look at these three systems and really just see how the Blue Heron was doing good stuff, but also kind of reinforcing the bad and not really making as much progress as you'd like. Miss was trying to do something fundamentally different while also using those power structures, just like how Kennett found is built off quote unquote good bureaucracy. And then, yeah, Charles has managed to reinvent just a worse and more competitive system, but he fixed one problem, maybe.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, maybe is the key word there, I think.
which just to me summarizes Kennett below, Kennett above, and Kennett found. Like I'm really growing on this idea of viewing the Kenneteers as just Kennett found's BHI.
Yeah, the line that clinches to me that they don't have the kids' best interests at heart at all is Marcy says, "We picked you." Effectively, Marcy's pep talk to Nomi is, "Hey, we picked you because we think when push comes to shove, you're willing to go all out and do some fucked up shit."
Yeah.
Like, oh, great. We picked you because we think we can turn you into a weapon that will just burn out and kill everyone
Yeah.
around you. So have fun. That's effectively what Marcy says, and it's just fucked.
Yeah.
And it's so clearly like Charles is just a fucking hypocrite. Like, assuming that that this is not just Marcy having made this happen, and Charles had a hand in this too. Like, it's clearly fucked.
It's because it's like it's one of those moments where you're like, oh, like how we've seen Marcy switch on her like Fey mode to uh like analyze situations, but she generally has it off. You could tell she must have had it off for this part because you're like it's so transparent how she's just like, we chose you because we know that you could just fuck shit right up, and it's like that is not. What do you like? That's not
Is that a
subtle at
good
all.
quality? I mean, what is that? Yeah.
Like I have a pretty shitty track record at seeing through Faye shenanigans in these stories. Like I think I'm about 1 for 200, and this one was very transparent. I was like, this is bottom tier fairy manipulation. This is just straight up simple manipulation.
She's lost her touch now that she's a
Yeah.
blood goddess and not just a fae.
Yeah, I'm interested how she's sort of balancing this turning the Fae part on for bits. Like it reminds me of that one part in Ward. I guess I shouldn't get into that, but yeah. I think the other thing we got to call out that Marcy talks about here that just made me chuckle is when Marcy is explaining to Nomi and the others that Kenneth is trying to build something new, but they haven't even cut out the rot first from within their own ranks.
And
just
Marcy, where does that? What? Can you just remind me again? Where does that rot come from? Is that wouldn't be related to Charles and you and anything, would it?
That's just like she has to be taking the piss when she says that, right? Like she has.
Yeah,
to be.
I mean, this is the argument that she levels against Kenneth. She says, "Oh, they're trying to do something new, but they're getting betrayed, so they fucking suck." And that's Marcy's argument against them. Like, I mean, what the fuck? It doesn't make any sense.
Like, bitch, they've cut you out. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah. Who do you think that's referring to? Is that Rook? Is that what we think?
I mean, yeah. Rook is generally the one thing where I'd say she had. Yeah, she has an argument here because I mean we've been complaining about having this conversation about Rook for for months,
Yeah.
both in and out of story.
Yeah.
So like she's touching on a good point here with something like Rook and potentially the Turtle Queen, but just of all the people to say it, like of all the pots to call the kettle black, like yeah, just yeah, it's I had a good chuckle at the hypocrisy of that one. She must mean like the only thing I can think of is they've kind of kicked Edith out, and Edith was right for their team because she was weak.
Mm,
Is that what she's referring to? It's a wild accusation.
yeah.
Like literally,
Yeah.
the one thing that has set Canada apart from all the other teams is that they're more picky about who they side with.
Yeah. um. So yeah, it's funny stuff. Marcy is a real prankster, practical jokester. Anyway, so the kids vote on whether to break the Christmas armistice or not, and they decide not to, just kind of technically. But then we find out that the Kentiers are about to commit a heinous act of war, which is, check my notes, inviting them to see some fireworks. So I'm sure things are about to go worse again.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, I do think those invites are going to be cause for the Negateers to hold another vote. But
Mm,
yeah, this is where we also see. So one of the seeds Marcy has planted here is that Nomi, if she wants to, can do something as fucking insane as what we just saw Joshua do.
mm,
And yeah, basically we see Nomi take that seed to heart and start growing it in her head at the end here, where she's like, "I'm going to build a giant fucking undead," and then she says to the others, "I'm going to build a giant fucking undead," and they all agree that this is a good idea. They should all start building their own nukes in case shit pops off, which is just like, fuck, this is going to be fun. I can't wait to see what Nomi going all out undead looks like. Yeah, it's going to be wild.
yeah. Yeah. I'm sure it will be rough. If it's anything like the Bedlamite screams, then yeah, I'm sure it'll be
Yeah.
rough.
And then yeah, this is also the part that you referenced earlier, where they're going to be hiring 5 more recruits by the end of the year, which is the end of the truce. Which feels like it specifically feels like Charles wanting to recruit pawns, right? Like
Oh
why
yeah,
would you?
expendables for sure.
Yeah. Either that, or they're anticipating losing a few Negateers if because Marcy is very openly encouraging them to attack before Christmas.
Hmm.
Um, so there's also the other read of they're expecting to lose a couple, so these 5 are the replacements for who they might lose before Christmas. Like
Hmm.
it just, like any way you cut it though, I was like, it's fucking sus as hell that it's like get us 5 new recruits by the day the war is meant to start.
Mm, yeah, it's again they're just sending lambs to the slaughter, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Charles and stuff are doing as good a job as Miss did with the Negateers. That's my hot take.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's much of a hot take. Pretty lukewarm on that one, I think.
Fucking freezing.
Um,
0 degree Kelvin take.
but let's get into our next chapter. Let's Live 24 with Lucy. Starts with a very sweet scene. The dog's telling Lucy an old story about John. And it's so sweet and lovely. And then they also are teaching her to shoot things. So, great.
Yeah. I mean, but like it's fun shooting, like I don't know, as somebody who grew up going to gun ranges every now and then, I did see it
Yeah.
as that odd, but I see what you're saying. Yeah, it is just the vibe here is just so nice. Like this story is hilarious. They're like in the process of being super chill with Lucy, as they're like training her during it. Like it's such a warm opening to the chapter.
Mm, yeah, it's really nice. Hey, Yoda's power sounds like a real pain in the ass. Hey, like making her laugh too hard and you get got like, ooh.
Yeah, I do. Well, yeah, you're right. That it sounds terrible, but I do love how it's the setup for this moment where Yolda manages to help the spirits realize that it's not actually John who deserves this treatment, but it is Fubar. Um, like it's the moment where like John is pushing through, like making her laugh because of the pain, and then it transitions to Fubar and he doubles down. Like it was just a great comedy.
Mm, yeah, yeah, it's good stuff. So yeah, we get some combat training with Fubar, and Lucy wins 10 out of 10.
This is just funny. Like the idea that they're like Fubar's gonna like help set up the targets, and then he just starts running out, and she's like, "Are you fucking serious?" And they're like, "We don't die if you shoot us. Go ahead." Like it was one of those classic Otherverse moments where I was like, "Oh yeah, of course that's part of it." Like, yeah, of course the guys who don't get permanently hurt by bullet wounds, like, "Hey Lucy, shoot us in the head."
Mm. Yeah, no, good times. Very funny. Comparing this to all the other bits and pieces of combat training that Lucy's doing is fun. Like, she's really just getting a great bag of fighting tricks, right? Not even
Mm.
that like magically inclined, just kind of like being a cool warrior. I kind of love
Yeah.
it.
Well, like something she brings up later in the chapter makes quite explicit is like this is our first, I think, real example, at least definitely since John went and got himself killed, of this third arm of like Lucy's combat practice, which is like because we've seen her make the three fox forms. She made the goblin fox, the fairy fox, and then she had the dog of war fox. And I remember us calling out when she did that against Father Gobar. We were like, "What does the dog of war fox mean in all this?" And this feels like the first chapter that's really sort of diving into that because there's the dichotomy of the fairy and goblin made it easy to be like the goblin fox is tricky and has many layers, and the fairy fox is a bit more um durable and like smooth and stuff, and that represents the fairy fighting she's got and the goblin fighting she's
Mm,
got. But what does this third arm of the dog of war fighting like actually mean for both Lucy and the foxes?
mm,
And we sort of start to get the answer here, which is just they're all about being relentless. Like what defines the dogs is that they'll stick a target on their head and fucking run at you. And like, you can shoot them and they'll just get back up and keep running at you.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
They can't be put down except
yeah.
John. Mm.
I love that we're finally because I think this has been something that has sort of been sitting in my mind for arcs and arcs. Is like I don't quite understand what this third side to Lucy outside of the Fae and Goblin meant because that's a dichotomy that's easy to understand. But like I love that we're finally seeing what the dog like as Lucy is growing closer to the Dogs of War, and presumably as they get let slip later in this arc, like we're finally sort of getting the picture of what John and the dogs mean for Lucy in terms of how she operates.
Yeah, yeah, um,
So
yeah,
she also mentions talking to Anthem about this stuff later in the chapter, and I hope we see
yeah.
that.
What a fun little tease that was. Like, is Anthem just kind of their captive sage?
No, 100% he has to be good now. I mean,
You
we
think he's
talked this,
turned?
to death when he first got in there, but especially with Musser out of the way,
Mm.
I have to believe, and what we saw of him with Macaulay, I've talked myself in my I've headcanoned that he's good now, and I'm not going to accept anything else.
Mm.
um, and I think it's so fun because as we talked about when Lucy and Anthem had their big fight, Lucy essentially is the daughter Anthem wanted, and he does kind of want to be a teacher at times. So it's just like him being one of her mentors is just so good. And I just want to see. I want this to be the world where that's what we get.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think it's great. Um, yeah, there's also a fun moment here where grandfather talks about things that you ought to do and things that you gotta do, which I totally missed. But obviously,
Yeah.
Lucy pulls that back in later. This is a grandfatherism that she's kind of internalized, which I just thought was really fun.
I'm so like this is such a good catch. I'm so glad you brought that up. I missed that on my second read too. But you're right, grandfather. This is what he espouses to her here. Is you've got the godders and the orders, and she throws that right at Booker later. Like that's yeah, because I
Mm.
suppose this is the other side of like the dogs as this kind of third arm of Lucy's combat. Is they're the ones who, and this is so true of who John was. They're the ones who are also the people who espouse that like don't just be fighting though. Like, the Dogs of War and John have always been, hey, we do the fighting, but also that shouldn't be your goal. Like, be relentless, create your army of foxes that are going to fuck all the shit up when you need to. but like don't like make sure you're taking make sure you're building yourself as a person too, because that's what they've had to work so hard to do.
Mm,
Like,
mm,
yeah, it's so good.
yeah, yeah. Lucy's vibe this whole chapter is of not being able to slow down, right? And it seems like
Yeah,
everyone
she's
is trying to
struggling.
tell her, slow down, Lucy, take this break that you get. And of course, the tragic thing is that the break that she tries to take gets taken away from her. We'll get to that later. Um, but yeah, Lucy and Verona have a meal together, and Avery rocks up after a little bit too. And what's this? A new pet. Um, Halfway through this meal, Verona just reaches into her coat and pulls out a cat, as you do. I guess she was saving that for a magic trick later or something. Yeah, no, it's a crazy thing to do by Verona. Just pulling out of a cat out of her jacket like she's Bounty Hamster and just kind of placing it on a box. But why not?
My favorite part is the moment where she gets the cat out, puts it on the table, and says, "Watch her," and then leaves. And Lucy's like, "Wait, am I watching the cat or is the cat watching me?" And Verona just it just says Verona like didn't reply, and it's like Verona
Yeah,
was fucking gritting to it. She's so happy with that. Like it's the most Verona shit ever.
yeah, yeah, wild. Um, so yeah, I mean, we'll get to that later in a second, I guess. But Avery also shows up, and we see that the boon is to just 24/7 make doors
Yeah.
around her, which is so annoying.
Yeah, because that came up in 20.2. They were like, "Do you
Yeah,
think this is only on the paths or it's everywhere?" And they
yeah,
weren't sure. And the answer is the more inconvenient one
yeah.
you'd think,
Everywhere,
which is,
all the
well,
time, always.
yeah. I
Everything,
mean,
everywhere, all at once is effectively what it is.
I mean, it's such like it's such a hilarious boon because that's so powerful, but also kind of inconvenient, which is
Yeah,
just
yeah,
so perfectly lost.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like thank God she has this bracelet because you're like, this is so cool, but also fuck, what a pain in the ass.
yeah. Good times. But yeah, so Verona reveals her plan for Juliet. And yeah, I mean, like, we see the first example of what that relationship might look like when they make a deal with a, so that Juliet can do a small favor for her. And it takes about
Yeah.
20 minutes to nut out the terms and conditions.
Yeah, it was I thought I found their rhythm quite fun. Like they're very much it genuinely reminded me of my sisters having fights when they were about the same age, which
Mm,
like for those who don't know, my sisters are twins. Um and it was very like the whole like going from, oh, I want dibs on this sweater next time we're fighting over who wants it. That very argument happened dozens of times that I saw. And then the vibe of like going from kind of negotiating slash arguing with each other to just like being weird twins where you finger gun each other and piss everyone else off with how in sync you are. Just yeah, the twin energy coming from Verona and Gillette here was off the chart. I
yeah.
thought it was very fun.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's very fun. But yeah, my guiding principle for Verona and Juliet here is if it takes longer to nut out the terms and conditions to guarantee that she won't fuck you over than it does to explain the task that you're doing, which took about 3 seconds to set up, then I think it's time to reevaluate this a bit. I
Yeah.
like it though. I like the familiar ritual vibe. Like I just feel like it's just a cool plan. I'm just into it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously, last week this came up. Was it last week? I don't remember. Time. What is it? And because I ran into because I only read the chapter for like an hour before the episode, it hadn't even occurred to me that this meant familiarship, and I really wasn't sure about it because it was very much like I didn't know whether to read it as kind of weirdly narcissistic or
Mm,
not. And I like that the story has taken the time to kind of present the case a bit to let you think on it more. Um, because you're right, it's grown on me. At first, I was like, oh, it does seem a bit weird. I suppose it could work, but I don't see it. And now that it's sort of been explained a bit, it's really grown on me. And I'm like, okay, yeah, like the whole vibe of like, I guess like the difference between having Gillette as a familiar versus just being someone like Alexander who doesn't have a familiar is Verona is essentially making a commitment to basically taking care of herself and watching herself. Like I think the big thing that stands out to me is like Verona is someone who historically hasn't been the best at recognizing what's going on with her. And this is a cool way for somebody to kind of commit to always, look at their own reflection and check that things are fine with it. Um,
Mm,
because yeah, I don't know. I guess like with all the talk of like Verona being Arrow and stuff, I would have assumed that like the obvious familiar thing would just be she's not going to get one.
yeah.
Um, which is why Alexander was my go-to example. But like I kind of like this vibe of yeah, treating it more as self-care. I guess is how Verona puts it.
Yeah. And it's clear that Verona has thought about it a solid amount, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like I
exactly.
think
Like
it actually does make sense.
yeah, it's like because we enter this part in this conversation where it starts to touch on the nerves of the whole Arc 12 fight between Lucy and Verona, and the two of them are both showing how much better they are at navigating that now. Because Verona pauses for a second, she's like, "Look, I have really been thinking about this, and the negatives you think about, I've probably thought about them. Please just give me the benefit of like giving it that due thought." And like Lucy's like, "Yeah, that's a fair request." And and that's like the sort of thing that caused them to blow up like 10 arcs ago. So it's yeah, it's this real moment of like yeah, growth from Broda where she's better able to communicate what's going on. Lucy's better able to listen to it. And it gives you sort of hope. And yeah, like I guess I don't know. I do remember like when I exited my previous relationship that I was in, like when I broke up with my girlfriend a number of years ago, there was that moment where when things ended, there was this big sense of me that was relieved that I didn't have to do all the stuff in the right way. Being in a relationship involves so many commitments or whatever. And I was
Mm,
like kind of glad to be free of that, which was one of the
mm,
many signs that we should have ended it a lot earlier. Um, but that did lead to me having more of that time to just like the time that would have been relationship stuff became me just doing stuff for me and I guess getting to be a bit selfish. And I,
yeah,
I, I guess I'm
yeah.
kind of mapping this in my head to what Verona is making a commitment to do, where it's not just about, yeah, it's about, I guess, her committing to making sure that she's taking care of herself. And I love it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a really strong step for Verona caring about Verona, which is not something that she has
Yeah.
historically done that much, right?
Yeah. And it's a weird way to do it, but it's
But a
Verona.
very
Like,
Verona way to do it for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, like she talks a lot about the sentience of Juliet and like how
Mm,
like and presents quite a consistent and coherent moral argument for why she thinks it's the right thing to do, and that's just like a very like Verona has been someone who I think is always very ethical, especially around others. But this is like a very like well reasoned and well presented argument that I think is convincing to Lucy and Avery of like, no, I have thought about this. Here's why I think it's the right thing for me to do. And they're just kind of like, oh yeah, okay, we'll think about it. But it's
yeah.
that like that. There's no if you beat Lucy in a debate using facts and logic, like that's a win, right?
Yeah, exactly. I really like the moment where the comparisons to Snowdrop come up, and Verona
Mm,
kind of says yes, but only a little bit, because I think that comparison does only get you so far. Like as Lucy
mm,
brings up, like Verona's made essentially a conscious decision to allow the fetch to grow, and this is where Verona was like, yeah, but I don't want to be the sort of person who like almost grows sentience and then kills it. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I want to explore these ideas to their fullest. And you're just like, yeah, that makes sense. Like if you're doing it the right way, which she seems to be putting the time into to doing it like that. And yeah, like I know it feels like the logical. I can see the step from the realization she had in 1917 after she lived her alternate life, where she found out she's just actually kind of a good person, um, to feeling this way about the fetch. Like you can see the dots from like, oh, maybe maybe I'm a good person. Maybe I'm not so aware of how I am. Like I got to do right by the fetch, and it can also be a part of me. Like it's such a seamless series of events. I really like it.
Mm, yeah,
Um, to before we get into the book of stuff though, I do want to take this moment because I'm always usually really bad at understanding the timelines, particularly in this story, and so I just want to run past you and the audience what I think the timeline that's established here is, so I can make sure I'm getting it right. So this chapter's happening on Christmas Eve,
yes,
and Booker is coming tonight for Christmas Eve. Well,
yes,
not really, and then he's leaving mid Christmas Day morning.
yeah,
Then Verona is meeting her mum on Christmas Eve tonight.
Yep.
Then hanging with her dad, except not really,
Yep.
in the morning. But then
When
also meeting
first
with
thing
her
in the
mum
morning.
on Christmas Day.
Yep.
And then, so I guess the bit that started to confuse me was then Avery is having Nora come over on Christmas
Yeah,
Day.
that's traveling on Christmas, Nora. Come on.
Oh no, I do that actually. When I went on holidays
Wild.
in the US, I flew on because it's so much cheaper
Yeah,
to
yeah.
travel
I
on
feel that. I feel
Christmas.
that. Yeah, maybe. And all the lords are busy with their own Christmas plans, so it's easy to
Yeah.
get through.
Yeah, yeah, no, what's weird is that Nora's mom is letting her go on Christmas. I thought she was coming on Boxing Day, but anyway. Um, and then, yeah, so we learn the actual Kelly Christmas is going to be a few days later, except it's probably not going to happen because shit will be all up in the fan by then, probably.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, okay. So yeah, so Nora is coming on Christmas Day and seemingly maybe just for one day or so.
mm,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. So yeah,
Um.
because I get sorry, I am jumping ahead a bit in the notes, but so it sounds like Lucy and Verona spend the last part of this chapter essentially preparing the market's big Christmas party. Like they're doing a big Christmas markets and going all out. Um, which I guess makes sense because if Nora and Sylvia are going to be here, that they want to dress them up, take their mum and their girlfriend in. I'm all for that, and I fucking love the idea of this giant Christmas party. I'm just so excited, and I'm so mad that it's probably going to go wrong because I just
No,
want this
no,
beautiful
no.
Christmas
It's gonna
party.
go well, and nothing will go wrong. Please, actually. Except things already start to go wrong because Booker is late and also has to leave immediately. Oh, great.
It is funny because, like, yeah, as you said, the dogs earlier on are like, "Hey, Lucy, make sure you're taking care of yourself." Like, and this has been the thing Lucy's been learning to do for most of the story now is find that balance of like fighting and prepping and just taking care of herself.
Mm,
And the dog's like, make sure you're giving yourself that relaxation time. And she's like, don't worry, I have it allocated. The time when Booker is here, that will be my time. And just like completely forgot to uh, account for the fact that she was putting all of her eggs in a potentially unreliable basket.
mm. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's rough. It's a rough one, right? Like it obviously, yeah, there's the thing that we talked about, which is that Lucy's one thing that she was prepping so she could turn off for has been lost. But also like I hate to say it, every time Booker has been in this story, he has disappointed Lucy, right? Like legitimately. It seems like it's become a pattern for him of just he has
Well,
become a disappointing brother, right?
and when she holds him to such reasonable standards.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I feel like uh, I guess there's been one or two times where
Yeah.
it
No,
just feels like this has happened a lot, right?
I
Is
guess
that
that's what
just me?
I think I get what you're saying. I don't think he's necessarily disappointed, but the recurring theme whenever Booker does show up is that it's never enough. Like,
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe I'm in Lucy's head for this.
yeah,
Um,
like he's sort of showing up, and it's good when he's there, but there's always some reason that means she's not getting to hang out with him as much as she'd
yeah,
like, and I think
and,
that's
and
probably what you're talking about. Yeah.
I wouldn't even just say it's as much as she would like because, like, I think she would love to hang out with him 24/7, right? But
Well, yeah.
like, obviously, this Christmas, as an example, this Christmas trip, him being there for less than 12 hours is pretty rough, and then that is even too much. Like, it's just I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's rough. It's rough.
I mean, he's like an 18/19-year-old in like what he's halfway through his second year of uni. Like, I do think, yeah, Lucy just has put him on too much of a pedestal. I guess like she definitely idolizes him and has a lot
Mm,
throughout this story, and I think is still maybe just yeah, still growing past that a bit. Like she really thinks Booker kind of has it all together, but like yeah, he's a 19-year-old dude. I can guarantee he doesn't.
yeah.
Like and that might just be something she's still got to come to terms with.
Mm, yeah.
Also,
Um,
again, she forgot to account for the fact he's an Ellingson, so he's going to be late because he's doing other things and he's taking care of other people. Like rookie
yeah.
error. Like, oh, he'll come spend time with me. He won't have other people to help. Have you met your family?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah. 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 But yeah, so luckily Lucy has been given a lovely coat from the dog tags, which is again very sweet. So fuck Booker, you've got a new band of brothers.
Yeah, this is so nice. Like after the Booker thing, like Lucy really needed this sort of pick me up, and basically the dogs giving her this jacket, which very much seems like them saying, "You're one of us, like you're part of the crew." Um, it's just such a beautiful, needed moment. Um, yeah, I mean, we used to talk back in Arc 13 about when we thought Arc 13 was going to be the end of the story. We used to talk about how we wanted the Lucy of the epilogues to have like the dog pack and be the leader of it or whatever. And this is like now we're getting the more interesting part where we get to see that journey, and this is like feels like a big step for that. Like she's been so awkward around the dogs for so long, and even in this chapter, they still kind of have to be like stop apologizing for everything all the time. Um,
Mm,
but she really is becoming one of them, and I can't wait to see. Yeah, her and them team up to fuck shit up at some point.
mm, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I love Mirthstrike's comment in chat that Lucy is the synthesis of both John and Yolda for the dog tags. That's such a good. I love that.
That is good. Oof, love it. Yeah, they're a great pack, aren't they? Um, but yeah, so Lucy and Verona rush off, and Lucy leaves rest mode and goes back to prep mode. They're on a fireworks mission, and they invite the Negateers to come along as well.
Yeah, and again, just fucking hype for the big Christmas party. Like, not just all the Christmas gifts and stuff, but the idea that like all of the three cadets are getting together to have a huge party is just so exciting.
Mm, yeah, no, it's gonna be fun. I think it'll be really cool.
Like the character interactions we're going to get to see.
Mm. No Nomi at the fireworks show, seemingly. But
Yeah,
maybe Yiyun will show up. The one that we really want.
if she's moved in yet, yeah, because
Yeah.
we didn't touch on the fact, but yeah, a bunch of the Forsworn people are going to get enrolled as teachers because why not?
Yeah, why not?
Um,
Fuck it.
yeah, no. So I think the three we get confirmed as coming are Kira Lynn, who, from what we've seen, seems to be one of the sane ones or the sanest. She did describe Yiyun as crazy at
Mm,
one point, which seems like a poor judge of character, but um, apart from that, she's been pretty bang on. So you got hopes for her, and then A- Adrian and Stefan are the other two who get confirmed, and maybe I need to track. Maybe I need to check Snowdrop Tiny Fans tracker because on mine those two names are essentially blank. Adrian and Stefan are the two we've got like no info on as far as I can remember.
mm,
Um, so I'm kind of glad that they're the two who are going to show up because we can finally get some info on them, and then they're also the two who are potentially not totally fucked up yet.
yeah,
And yeah, I love that the Negateers are all still so divided on everything. Like it is it is reminiscent of fighting Muss's contingent again, where you can lure a few of them out to have a talk.
yeah. Lure them out with friendship and fireworks.
Also, sorry, I can't believe you skipped over it. We see your
Mm,
boy Stu Mullen here for a
the
bit.
champ, the king.
He's such a glorious dumbass. I love that he's just like he's got the sort of scantily clad women draped over his lap sort of vibes, but they're actually the ones doing the business because he's too fucking stupid to manage it himself. Like it's such a fun inversion of that sort of trope. Like they're actually the ones sort of with the real power. It is the vibe I got.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Um, I love Stu Mullen. But yeah, so then the chapter ends with another visiting for Christmas character, Edith.
Yay!
Yay. This is
Um,
going to go great, and I'm sure it won't be wrong.
I'm very excited. Like Edith is someone who I've been missing from the story ever since she kind of disappeared from it because she just was such a fun piece of shit, and then she disappeared right after her redemption arc seemed potentially possible. Um,
Mm,
so I'm actually I'm really keen to see what the Kennedys can do for her, especially because Verona has been leading the charge on this front, and I think considering all the Edith Brett comparisons that have happened, the potential for Verona to be the person who helps Edith is fascinating to me. Like,
mm,
because this is the thing, right? Like, as has been said a billion times, it's not Verona's job to fix Brett. get her the fuck out of there, etc., etc. But like, Verona is someone who does want to help people and help others, and so there's something important to her, helping the Brett like other. Like it's this sort of thing where it's like she's able to look past her own bullshit to help, not Brett, because she doesn't need to help Brett, but she can find it in herself to help people who are a little bit similar in a way.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next chapters. I mean, like, we've got the Verona chapter with the Brett mourning and the Edith stuff. We've got the Avery stuff with Nora coming into town and finally finding out what her life is like post promenade. There's just all these cool things.
Yeah, and all of it kind of coinciding with like the Christmas party, which presumably Sylvia and Nora are going to be at. Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the end of our chapters for this week. But don't forget, everyone, we've got a discussion question that we're running at the moment. List some Christmas gifts you would get for some pale characters, and we'll try and guess who they're for. So
yeah, the timing on this one's working out quite well, actually, because I have a feeling. I have a feeling we'll be back next week to talk about some canon gifts as well as what our listeners have come up with.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So you can leave your answers to that in our discussion thread, which we linked in the show notes down below.
Yes, don't forget about the Pale Predictor form. We should probably add some new categories to that or something. But yeah, that's still there. Submit your predictions. We'll pull out some good ones, read them out in our episodes, and there will be prizes at the end of the story when we do All Packed Up too. So, get your predictions in there.
Yeah, and you'll get your prize.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, potentially. You can win yourself a prize, yeah. And speaking of prizes, the best prize of all is checking out our website at doofmedia.com. What a prize that website is. So go to doofmedia.com and enjoy it. For our gift from us to you, everybody.
Yeah. And if you want a present that's as poorly wrapped as Lucy's was, head to our Twitter at Pale Reflectcast.
Oh yeah. That's a good prize. Yeah, daily memes. I like that.
Yep. Daily
Every
memes.
single day. And if you want to support all the great memes that we're making every day, you can go to patreon.com/doofmedia and become a patron. It's your support that helps us make shows and all that jazz. All the great shows on the Doof Media Network only exist because of our Patreon. So go to patreon.com/doofmedia and become a patron and get a bunch of episodes of bonus content. We released a bonus content show, Elliot, pretty recently, last week it was. And I thought it was a very fun one. So check that out.
Yeah, that was one of the better episodes of the High Ground, I think. Yes, don't forget to stop by Wildbow's Patreon too, patreon.com/Wildbow. It may not be Christmas in the real world, but it's Christmas in the Otherverse. So send him like an Otherverse Christmas present and up your donation. Send him a one-time. Do whatever you can, because if he stops getting money, he presumably can't afford to keep writing, and none of us want that.
Yeah.
Imagine if he had to stop before Pale ends.
That would be
how would you feel?
Horrific. Yeah, of course. Yeah. All right, folks. Well, thanks, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.